19 years. It sounds like a lifetime when you say it out loud, but in reality, it's a series of small moments that string together to form something bigger, something you don't always realize is happening. My husband, James, and I have been together for almost 2 decades, and in that time, we've laughed, cried, argued, made up, and built a life full of unexpected traditions. Some of those traditions are based on misunderstandings so small, you'd think they wouldn't matter. But, as it turns out, they shaped our relationship in ways we never could have predicted. Let's start at the beginning, or at least, what feels like the beginning. Back in the early days, James and I were still getting to know each other. You know that phase, where you're paying attention to everything the other person says, trying to figure out what makes them tick? It was around that time that we were watching a nature documentary together. I wasn't really paying attention to it. I'm not much of a bird enthusiast, but James made a passing comment about how he thought owls were interesting. Owls are fascinating birds, he said, in that casual, offhand way people do when they're just making conversation. At the time, I latched onto it. I thought, oh, okay, this is something he likes. Owls. Great. I can work with that. I wanted to be thoughtful, to show him I was paying attention. So for his next birthday, I bought him an owl-themed gift. It was a small ceramic owl, nothing fancy, just a cute little trinket I thought he'd appreciate. When he opened it, he smiled, said, "Oh, thanks, honey. I really like it." And that was it. A seed was planted. From that moment on, owls became my go-to theme for every gift-giving occasion. Christmas? Owl ornaments. Valentine's Day? Owl-themed chocolates. Anniversaries? I found owl mugs, owl prints, owl socks. If it had an owl on it, I bought it. I thought I was nailing this whole thoughtful partner thing. Every time I gave him an owl gift, James smiled and thanked me, and I felt like I was winning at marriage. Little did I know, James wasn't as into owls as I thought. But before we get to that revelation, let me tell you about another funny misunderstanding that ran alongside the owls: the cookies. James is a decent baker. I'm not saying he's ready for the Great British Bake Off or anything, but he can make a mean batch of chocolate chip cookies. In fact, one of the reasons I fell in love with him was because of those cookies. There's something about a man who knows his way around the kitchen that just makes you swoon, right? Well, early on in our marriage, James made a batch of cookies one night. Unfortunately, they came out a little crispy. Maybe he got distracted, or maybe the oven was too hot. Whatever the reason, they were on the verge of being burned. Now, I didn't want to hurt his feelings. We were still in that stage where you don't want to be too critical, especially not about something as trivial as cookies. So, I did what any loving wife would do. I lied. I took a bite of one of those crispy cookies, smiled, and said, "You know, I actually like my cookies crispy." James' face lit up. "Really? I thought they were overdone." "Nope," I said, lying through my teeth. "Crispy is my favorite." And that was that. From that moment on, every time James made cookies, he made sure to leave a few in the oven just a little too long, just for me. Every batch had its crispy section, and every time I dutifully ate them with a smile, even though in reality, I preferred my cookies soft and chewy. This went on for years. 19 years, to be exact. 19 years of owl gifts and crispy cookies, all based on 2 little lies we told each other in the early days of our relationship. Neither of us ever questioned it. We just accepted it as part of our routine. But then something changed last Christmas. It was a typical holiday season. We had decorated the house, wrapped the presents, and were preparing to spend the day with family. I had just given James his Christmas gift, an owl sculpture I had found at a local craft fair. It was one of the nicest owl-related gifts I had ever given him, and I was excited to see his reaction. James opened the box, looked at the sculpture, and smiled. But this time, there was something different in his expression, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. He stared at the owl for a moment longer than usual, then looked at me with a curious look in his eyes. "What is it?" I asked, suddenly feeling a little nervous. James hesitated for a moment, then finally said, "You know, I've been meaning to ask you something." I blinked. "Okay, what is it? Why do you keep giving me owl stuff?" I stared at him, confused. "Because you love owls," I said, as if the answer should have been obvious. James chuckled, but there was a nervous edge to it. "Yet about that, I don't really love owls." I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. "What do you mean?" "I mean, owls are fine, I guess. They're cool birds, but they're not, like, my favorite or anything." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. All these years, I had been buying owl-themed gifts for every occasion, thinking I was being thoughtful and sweet, only to find out that James wasn't even that into owls. I felt a mix of embarrassment and disbelief. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" I asked, feeling a little foolish. James shrugged. "I didn't want to hurt your feelings. And honestly, it was kind of sweet that you kept doing it, so I just went along with it." I couldn't help but laugh. It was so absurd. For nearly 2 decades, I had been showering him with owl gifts, and he had been quietly accepting them, all because neither of us wanted to rock the boat. As the laughter died down, I realized it was my turn to come clean. "Well," I said, "since we're being honest, I have something to tell you too." James raised an eyebrow. "Oh no, what is it?" "I hate crispy cookies." James' jaw dropped. "What? But you've been eating them for years." "I know," I said, feeling a little guilty. "I only said I liked them that one time because I didn't want to hurt your feelings, and now, every time you bake cookies, you burn some on purpose for me." James stared at me, wide-eyed, and then burst out laughing. "Are you serious? You've been eating crispy cookies for 19 years, and you don't even like them?" "I'm serious," I said, laughing along with him. "I've been choking them down this whole time." We both dissolved into fits of laughter. It was ridiculous. 19 years of owl-themed gifts and crispy cookies, all because we had both been trying to spare each other's feelings. The whole thing was so absurd that we couldn't stop laughing. For days afterward, every time we saw an owl or made cookies, we'd start giggling all over again. 19 years of laughter, misunderstandings, and funny memories. But if I've learned anything from our journey, it's that love isn't about perfection. It's about persistence, humor, and those little quirks that make us, well, us. That time we tried to paint the living room, we ended up covered in splashes of pastel blue paint, giggling like children. We didn't stop to clean it up right away. Instead, James took my hand, pulled me close, and out of nowhere, started slow dancing with me in the middle of the paint-splattered room. We swayed to the sound of our own laughter, the mess of our failed project forgotten, replaced by the warmth of just being together. Those are the moments that stick with you. The moments when the world around you doesn't have to be perfect because you've got each other. And that's more than enough. As we wrapped up another Christmas, still chuckling over the owl lie and the cookie deception, I realized how lucky I was. We might have had our little misunderstandings, but they were rooted in love, in the simple desire to make each other happy. And after all these years, that's what still mattered. One evening, not long after our Christmas revelations, I was sitting in the living room, reading a book, when I noticed James was unusually quiet. I looked up to find him standing in the doorway, holding something behind his back, with a sheepish grin on his face. "What are you hiding?" I asked, narrowing my eyes playfully. He stepped forward and revealed a small plate of freshly baked cookies. They were golden brown, just slightly crispy around the edges, but soft in the middle, the perfect balance. He set the plate down in front of me, still grinning. "Okay," he said, "I figured it's time I make cookies the way you actually like them." I laughed, the gesture melting my heart. "You didn't have to do that," I said, but my smile told him I appreciated it more than words could say. James sat down beside me, wrapping his arm around my shoulder as I took a bite of one of the cookies. It was perfect, just the right amount of crisp, with the gooey, soft center I loved. "You know," I said between bites, "this might be the best cookie you've ever made." He chuckled. "Well, after 19 years of practice, I figured it was time to get it right." We sat there for a while, quietly enjoying the cookies and each other's company. The house was calm, the soft glow of the Christmas lights twinkling in the background. It was one of those moments that felt simple but significant, a moment that made me realize just how far we'd come, and how much I loved this man sitting beside me. "Can I admit something?" I asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "Go ahead," James said, looking at me curiously. "After all these years, I think I've started to like crispy cookies a little more than I used to." He smiled and shook his head. "And after all these years," he said, "I think owls are starting to grow on me." I leaned in, resting my head on his shoulder. "Guess we're both learning new things even after all this time." James kissed the top of my head, pulling me a little closer. "That's the thing about us, isn't it? We're always learning, always growing. Together." I smiled, feeling the warmth of his words wrap around me like a blanket. He was right. 19 years of owls, crispy cookies, spilled paint, and crooked bookshelves. All of it had brought us to this moment, sitting together, still laughing, still learning, still in love. As the years stretched on before us, I knew there would be more little surprises, more misunderstandings, and more laughter. But one thing was certain: whatever life threw our way, we would face it together. And that, more than anything, was the greatest gift of all.